Good evening, everyone. I think it's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to be respectful of your time. So we'll begin with a prayer, and I want to use the same prayer to begin and close that I did last week. These are the prefaces that are used in the liturgies for the dedication of a church and altar. And the texts are quite poetic, but they also unpack the theology of sacred space quite well, I think. If you recall last week, that's what my focus was, the evolution of sacred space since the dawn of humanity and what it's come to today and how we use it. So today we're going to move into this sacred space after we look at just a few basic principles, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ken Brooks, the artist, designer who's with us tonight. Would you stand, please? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Father most holy, it is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere to give you thanks. For you have made the whole world a temple of your glory, that your name might be everywhere extolled. Yet you allow us to consecrate to you apt places for the divine mysteries. And so we dedicate joyfully to your majesty this house of prayer built by human labor. Here is foreshadowed the mystery of the true temple. Here is prefigured the heavenly Jerusalem. For you made the body of your Son, born of the tender Virgin, the temple consecrated to you, in which the fullness of the Godhead might dwell. You also established the church as a holy city, built upon the foundation of the apostles, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone, a city to be built of chosen stones, given life by the Spirit and bonded by charity, where for endless ages you will be all in all, and the light of Christ will shine undimmed forever. We pray in his name, now and forever. Thank you. You may be seated. So just to put out some liturgical principles that can help guide our discussion and that have guided our tentative plans so far. These are taken from the document Built of Living Stones, which the bishops of this country promulgated a number of years ago as the guiding document for any church that's going to be built or renovated. So here are some things to keep in mind. That the church building is designed to be in harmony with church laws and serve the needs of the liturgy. So here are where we find most of those laws. The Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, which is the highest, most universal set of principles. That's the general instruction to the Roman Missal, which is very specific on how the Mass is to be celebrated. Those principles are at the beginning of the Roman Missal. The dedication of a church and altar has rubrics as to how a building should be ordered, and then the Code of Canon Law. So when we're looking for liturgical law with regard to sacred space, they're found in all of those sources. And then always keeping in mind that the church building fosters, or should, participation in the liturgy, that this is not primarily a place for private or devotional prayer, but public prayer, the universal prayer of the church. Next. The design of the church building needs to reflect the roles of the participants. I would also add reflect. So where is the choir? Where are the clergy? Where do the laity sit? So that's what that basically means. It has to acknowledge those and be designed very in particular for them. The church building respects the culture of every time and place. You may recall last week I emphasized the importance of always keeping in mind that the Holy Spirit works in every age, that when we design our churches or create artwork, we have to do more than just imitate what was in the past. You know, as much as we might like Romanesque or Gothic architecture, we can't just always make Gothic churches. We never have. Otherwise, we wouldn't have evolved the way we did. So what is pertinent at this time, in this place, in this culture? And there's a certain fluidity in all of that, obviously, because that changes, and we have a diversity in cultures, especially in the United States. And then, always the church should be beautiful. Now, there we get into a little tension because everybody defines beauty differently, but hopefully we can come to some agreement on that in the next slides. These statements are taken from another document called Art and Environment in Catholic Worship. This document was promulgated, well, quite a few years ago, even before Built of Living Stones, which replaced this one. But there's some very good principles in here that I think merit our consideration. They say liturgy flourishes in a climate of hospitality, where people feel welcome, where they feel comfortable with each other, where they have visibility, mobility, and are not just spectators at some kind of an event that's going on up here. At the same time, the place has to have a sense of mystery, or what we call transcendence. The very long-standing word for that is the numinous. It inspires awe. It gives a sense of the holy and invites contemplation. So there's always going to be a tension between those two. How much hospitality do we want to emphasize over above a sense of transcendence? And in the evolution of church architecture in this country, there's always been a little struggle there. Particularly after the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, a great deal of emphasis was placed on the immanence, which we needed at that time, because churches tended to be more the neo-Gothic and the more traditional, if you want to use that word. And so what they were trying to recover was the importance of the community, that this place is called the church, but so are the people who are in it. So some have decided to say this is the house of the church rather than just the church building. And because of that period of time when we emphasized hospitality and immanence, we got things like gathering spaces and other rooms where people could gather beforehand and mingle and socialize, courtyards. Great things came out of that. But at the same time, we got bad things like carpet, which kills acoustics and isn't terribly sanitary and can serve as trip hazards, as we've seen a number of times. So every time, or every element, every feature, every quality, has its positives and its negatives. But I think right now what we're seeing is a desire for more of this. From what I've been reading, and from what you see younger people attracted to, the ones who like the more traditional Mass, the Tridentine Mass, signs of identity, there's, I think, a desire to come back to a happy balance between the two of those. Because as much as we like to be comfortable and hospitable, we know that this isn't just a meeting hall. It's not an assembly center. It's a place where we worship God. So it has to have a God-centeredness and an environment that invites that. All right, next one. They say we need quality and appropriateness in our liturgical appointments and statuary. What is quality? Well, this document says quality is perceived by contemplating it, by looking at it from a distance, letting it speak. So I think one of the most exquisite examples is Michelangelo's Pietà. So that's why I've ordered an exact replica. And Shirley's buying it. To behold, what is it that we want to behold? The hand stamp of the artist. So it's not just a mass-produced object that you open a catalog and point to. That there's an honesty in the material, like marble or wood, that it's not artificial, it's not fake. That there's a pleasing form, a color, texture, there's a harmony to it, a love and care that went into making it. You see, you can only find those things if you take the time to contemplate it and ponder it. Over a while, I think people distinguish what's durable and what isn't. Next, and appropriateness. Quality and appropriate. What is it appropriate? Well, this document says it has to be capable of bearing the weight of history by inspiring these things: awe, reverence, wonder, transparency. By here, that transparency, they mean that you see beyond the object to something greater, ultimately God. And it means avoiding anything trivial or fake or pretentious, like that banner. So that's an example of what I believe is not appropriate. It looks like something that maybe the third grade art class did, and it might be nice in a classroom, but that doesn't inspire mystery, I don't believe. It doesn't inspire awe. We had the age of the banners. Remember back in the 70s, after the liturgical changes were enforced, and we went through that period of whitewashing churches and banishing statues, all of a sudden these burlap banners went up. And that's what people noted. They got rid of the marble statues and they put in burlap banners. What's going on here? See, one extreme begets another. And next, appropriateness continued has to serve and not interrupt the ritual. That means you have to see how the Mass or the ceremony unfolds in that space. So, does the space or the object affect the assembly, how it's seated, the lighting, the acoustics, seasonal decorations, sacred vessels, sanctuary? So when I say it serves and not interrupts the ritual action, here's an example of something that does interrupt the ritual action and doesn't serve the liturgy. Why? Well, we have the creche right here, which hides the altar, which is supposed to be the primary symbol in the assembly, and quite an array of artificial trees. And I'm sure those are real flowers, but there's far too many of them in that space. So that's an example of what would not be an appropriate environmental decoration. So now we're going to focus on our speaker from St. Paul Fabricating Company, and he's that one right there. This is his dad, this is his son, and Ken Brooks is right now the owner and the one that I have worked with when I was up in Superior, Wisconsin, in the Office of Worship, I should say. We renovated the cathedral. And when we looked at different companies that did renovation as a committee and saw St. Paul Fabricating, it was absolutely no question about it. That's who we wanted. Next. Next. Oh. So this is from their webpage, which I assume, Ken, you wrote. Here at St. Paul Fabricating and Decorating, we have spent more than 80 years filling the needs of churches both locally and nationally. Located in St. Paul, Minnesota, we work only with the most skilled craftsmen to bring your project to life. We believe in delivering high-quality projects and an exceptional customer experience to everyone we work with. I can testify that from my own experiences. Excuse me a minute. We offer our customers the highest level of quality, value, with all their experience in furniture, interior design, restoration. Whether it's a brand new church or being a renovated church, the furniture, refurbishing the needs of the existing appointments, they really work with the client to bring about a very happy product. Next, here are some examples. Now this is the altar in the Superior Cathedral. And there's a great story to this. This is the mensa from the old high altar that used to be attached to the wall. And those were the marble columns. So the altar was quite long, as you know, altars used to be when they were attached to the wall. And it was pulled forward, but it was still too long. So we cut the slab, the mensa, down. Just a second. And we pulled the marble columns in, but it lacked what we said was a gravitas. It was too much negative space, all that air underneath. So Ken and St. Paul Fabricating fashioned this beautiful insert of marble that went in there. And the relics are entombed right in front of it under the floor. But when the product, the altar, was made and brought and installed, I made the mistake of not telling Ken where the front of the altar was to face. So right around here, there was this big blemish, which was where the altar was attached to the wall. You know, and I neglected to tell them to put that in the bag. Well, when I came in that night, the blemish was right in the front. And I thought, oh no. Because one of the benefactors was a priest in the diocese. And I thought, you know, that's going to stare right at you forever. So I said, Ken, is there something we can do? He said, this is now cemented on. The mensa is cemented to the columns. I said, is there any way to turn it around? He said, well, we'll try. So this is how good he is. He has this huge lift that they brought back in to lift that slab, and they had to very carefully chisel under the marble altar where it was attached. And there were no guarantees it wouldn't shatter or crack or damage the whole thing. He probably worked all night on that with his son. And then the next morning I came in and there it was. All beautiful, blemish behind, mensa facing. That's the kind of work he does. And then toward the end of the project, I said, you know, we haven't designed a tabernacle yet. And I said, I don't have anything in mind, do you? Okay, so let me think about it. So he designed this beautiful, beautiful house that contains the Eucharistic elements. And he based it off of those arches that you see in the side. It's a Romanesque cathedral. And in the bell tower, the same motif. And then attached this pyramid to the top with the gold cross. And I think that's a very good example of something that inspires and gives a sense of transcendence and mystery and numinous. It's as majestic as the mystery it houses within it. This is a hanging crucifix in St. Thomas Church in St. Thomas. In where? St. Paul. It's a seminary. All right, next slide. These are the pews. Since we're considering refinishing our pews, I thought I'd show an example of his work there. We're talking about painting. What are some options? We could just do the whole ceiling gold. Next. And then that's an example of the whole sanctuary of St. Thomas Chapel that Ken and Ken Brooks' company. So you see the quality of work that they do and why I was so eager to hire them to help us. So just a few next guidelines for our discussion in what follows. Ken's going to talk and then open it up to questions. But I'd like to suggest we watch certain things in our conversation. First of all, we need to avoid the distinction between wants and needs, because those are such relative terms. One person's want is another person's need. And depending upon who you talk to, it blurs the boundaries. I just don't think those are helpful categories. When I was telling Ken about this, he said, well, the need is to just have a beautiful space. So when we're looking at the particulars, let's not think in those terms of what do we want versus what do we need. And I know we like to go that way because that's how we can figure out financially what we can afford. But in the long run, those just are not good categories because they are so relative. Beauty is a need. So, secondly, let's avoid the generic people, because there's a tendency for individuals to say, the people won't like this. And when I hear that, I always want to say, well, give me names and numbers. Or people say, the people I talk to say, and those are usually the people that they see on a regular basis at that particular Mass on that particular day. So let's not quote other people. If you do quote them, then give us their name and some way we can contact them to verify whether you interpreted their statement correctly. The bishop in Superior, where I worked, used to say, people who hide behind anonymity have no right to put ideas in our heads. So his practice was if he got a letter and there was no name, he discarded it. So let's not be anonymous in our comments this evening, but rather, next slide, use phrases like, in my opinion, in my experience, I observe, I like this because. And when you give the reasons, tell us why, in some sense, you're credible. Why is your opinion in this matter something we should hear? Just don't say, I like it. This is why it's so difficult to define beauty. And in the end, I believe we have to trust artists, people who have had experience as well as training in art and work of this nature. Because while we all have what we feel like makes us good or what makes us feel good, in the end, there are certain standards and objectives that I believe we have to adhere to. And then lastly, when we're beginning, like we are tonight, with discussion in art, architecture, let's not start with personal taste. I like this. I like Romanesque. I like Gothic. Rather, let your preferences be shaped from these three questions. And I offered those last week. So what model of church will this space employ? Will it be a very hierarchical model? Do we want something that emphasizes community? Something that shows clergy participating with the people? So think of what model you have been shaped in and what contemporary models of church are tending to be. Secondly, we want to ask, well, how would the space encourage this full, conscious, active participation? That's a phrase right out of the Vatican documents. For example, one of the things that doesn't encourage this, in the opinion of musicians, is the carpet. It absorbs sound, it keeps the acoustics dead, it doesn't allow for that beautiful movement of music throughout an area. And then, what role will the building play in the life of the neighborhood? I don't know how much we've thought about that. I don't know that we have to think that much about it, but it is a consideration churches have these days, because we're not just using our buildings for worship. Some churches have concerts in them, some have sacred drama. How does it fit with the environment, the local villages or towns? How does it harmonize with all of that? Okay? Then before I turn it over to Ken, is there any, or are there any questions on any of those principles or clarifications? Good. So remember, avoid wants and needs, avoid the people say, and make the I statement. So, Ken, it's all yours.
Well, won't have to hold that so close, I don't think. For the most part, I can pretty much just say ditto, because what Father just told you is a lot about what I was going to talk about as well. The wants, the needs, the desires, the liturgy and the setting and the invitedness, the hospitality and that kind of stuff in the setting, what we're looking for. But what Father asked me to do tonight was to give a brief background history of the company, myself, my experiences, what I see developing here in this church, and why I see it that way. So briefly, I'll keep it as short as I can. Briefly, the company's been around since 1905. Started in Italy, came to the U.S., and it slowly evolved from church statues and developing of carvings of statues and stonework into church furniture, into the development and renovation of churches, and so on down the line. Well, my dad purchased it in about 75, and that's when I started working for him. So my first couple years in the industry and the business, I cleaned toilets and pushed a broom. So when they said that I was an expert at that, after a couple of years, they advanced me into the architectural division, which was plaster casting, ornamental plaster casting, developing of plaster statues. So I spent 2 years in the dungeon, and it literally was the dungeon. It was downstairs in the basement of the building. The ceilings were about 7 feet tall, and if you ever pictured an old dungeon in one of the old movies, that was it. So they locked me in the basement for a couple of years until they thought I was a master at plaster casting and developing of molds and models and so on. Then they let me out, and I spent a couple of years in the woodwork division of the company, and then I spent a couple of years after that in the metalwork of the company, and then they actually let me into the office after about 15, 20 years. And then I got into the design stages of items, into the furniture, and then into the churches. Oh, and I'm sorry, then they let me paint churches for a while. I painted churches for about 2 years as well, which was another division of our company at the time. So from about 1975 up to about 1995, that was kind of my history in the company. 95 is when 84 I bought part of the company, and in 95 I bought the rest of the company from my father. And now I am in the possibility, or I shouldn't say possibility, I am in the process of turning the reins over to my son as well, in the picture. So that's my background as far as this company goes. From about 1975 to 1995 is where I've got all my training, and then they actually let me loose to developing from 95 till now, working with churches on my own. So through those years, if one of the questions you may ask is, where's my degree? I do not have a degree from a college or an institution. My degree is the OJT. I studied under Frank Kasmarczyk, and these are liturgical consultants, designers / architects. From 1975 up to 2000, 2005, these are the guys that I were mentored by. So Frank Kasmarczyk, liturgical consultant, Dick Vasco did Superior, Carol Frenning, Phil Broussard, George and Craig Rafferty, father-son team, and architectural, Ted Butler, architect. There's a lot more, Lee Tollefson, and least but not least, my father, Ray. He was very instrumental in the designing and developing of me, and the company as well. So I have no formal degree in architectural design, but I studied for 30 years or plus under some of the leading designers in this industry. So that's my training, is just that. So tonight, when I first get invited into a church, the first thing that I see when I want to walk through that door is pulpit, the Word of Christ, altar, the body and blood of Christ, the baptismal fount, rebirth in the Spirit of the Holy Spirit, are the three things that I'm kind of looking for. Depending on what church we do, each church has its own theology as to the importance of which piece is their focal point. The Scripture, the body, or the rebirth. So those are the pieces that I'm looking for when I first walk into the church. One of the downsides to this church, for me, is I enter from the side. I don't enter from the back. So when I first came into the church, the first thing I saw was big dark beams, a lot of lines, and a lot of dots, light fixtures. Then it was like, oh, yeah, there's the messy choir. No offense to your choir people. We got that up front. And then I noticed the altar, the pulpit, and we walked past the font on the way in. So it was down the list, down the row for me, which should be the top, not the bottom, but the top. So my thinking then turns into is like, how do we create that visual, the importance of the Scripture, the setting, the sanctuary setting, back as the focal point of the setting, not the structure, not the light fixtures, not the entertainment. Get back on the body and blood and the Word of Christ. So it's very difficult at times. Again, especially this church, when you enter from the side, your main focal shot is across the room. So it's hard to get focus back up here. So how do we accomplish that? We simplify it as much as we can, keeping it as beautiful as we can. So in other words, what do we do to get rid of the lines? Well, there's a few things we can do. Remove them, cover them up, paint them a different color would work on some of that. So that's the one as far as the lineage goes. So my first thought is to sheetrock all the lines. Get rid of all the lines up front, in the back, in the ceiling, sheetrock it. It's a question of structural at this point to see if we can add some more weight to the ceiling. I'm not sure we can do that yet, but we'll have structural engineers be looking at that. So simplifying the setting as far as eliminating some of the eye-catching things to bring it back again up front. So lines was one. I'd love to get rid of the big beams, but structurally the church needs them. My one thought was to lighten them up, so they're not so powerful and smack you in the face when you walk into the building. But they're an evil necessity with the black fixtures and the spots. I'm not sure how to get rid of that. So instead of trying to mess around with trying to eliminate that, we'll focus on some other things, like the ceiling, the walls, the lights, to maybe take your focal point away from the ceiling, as low as it is in the back, to bring your focal point back up front, center again. So then the spotlights, to restructure that, get rid of those as much as we can to give you the light you need in the pew setting, because right now you've got a lot of hot spots and a lot of dark spots. I'm sure there's a lot of people, and I would be one, I got my eyes. I wouldn't be able to see in certain settings throughout here. I'd have to move to where there's a light so I could actually see. So what I'm going to try to do is we'll have an electrical engineer come in and try to revamp the lighting system so that's a more even flood of lights without hanging big chandeliers, because you don't have the room on the ceiling to do some of that with the slope ceilings that you have in here. So if we can refocus some of the lighting to warm the setting as a whole, that's would be the ultimate. Now, electrical engineer, I am not, so we're going to have to trust that person to come up with a scheme for us as to how we can do that, accomplish that, without having more obtrusive things hanging off the ceiling. Because that's one thing I don't want to do, being that 90% of your light is under these two wings. I don't want to drop things over there that are hanging down in front of people. So we're going to try to keep them up to the ceiling as tight as we can, but yet get an even more dispersed lighting to it. Now, the other thing that I try to do when we come into a church setting is to make it timeless. Another word for that is your carpet, for an example. You're going to carpet this place. If you want to do that again, you're going to end up replacing the carpet within 20 years, 25, 30 years, depending on how worn it gets, overuse. So my ultimate goal is to make it somewhat timeless to the point where you don't have to renovate this church in another 10, 20, 30 years. So in other words, one of those things that would do that would be the old tile floor that you have down your hallway out here, the quarry tile flooring, that is timeless, that tile. This white porcelain stuff behind me, no, that's not timeless. That comes and goes as a period of time as people renovate houses and do that kind of stuff. It comes into fashion and then it goes out. So my ultimate goal is to have something brought in here that will last forever. The quarry tile is one of them. Terrazzo floor is another one. Eliminate the carpet. Eliminate, wood would work too, but eliminate the carpet is really what I want to do in here. And whether we put the quarry tile in or the terrazzo in, those are two timeless floorings that we can use. Tile would work, depending on the style of the tile and the colors. And so there's certain tiles out there, like natural stone tiles, that would work as well. So we could lay the tile in here if you wanted to skip the expense of the terrazzo. So certain tiles would work, but again, white porcelain does not. So I'd like to change that out and get a timeless, again, flooring that works forever. And again, terrazzo would be one of those for sure. So the flooring, and then I'm going to go back to the needs. Your pews need some help, for sure. They are at a point right now where they're in reasonably good condition, but it ain't going to be much longer, and they're going to need some serious care. They're at that age where they're going to start deteriorating pretty rapidly. So refinishing the pews is really, sorry, Father, is really a need. It just needs to be done. It needs to be done. And I think with the setting as a whole, the way it is, darker color would have fit this setting a lot better. Now, I don't mean dark brownish black. I'm talking kind of a medium walnut type color. A medium color, a little bit darker than what you have, but not as dark as your furniture up front or the beams. So it'll give a much warmer feeling, more inviting feeling than these blonde pieces. And so definitely do the pews. The other issue that I have with this setting is the sanctuary itself. It's so massive, it's big, it's spread out. It's, to be honest with you, I would love to cut it in half and get rid of part of it. But I'm thinking I'd get probably shot if I start doing some of that. But I'd certainly like to downsize it a little bit, bring things a little bit closer together, a little more user-friendly as far as the overall setting goes. So I would certainly like to bring that all in as well. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking need to be done, should be done, and why you want to do that. I'm going to go back to a couple of no-nos that Father said here, but there's an architect that I used to work with that told me a long time ago that if the church isn't changing, if the church is stagnant, it is dead. Now, that doesn't mean change your theology, change your thinking, change the Bible, change your preaching, type of things. It's the setting as a whole. The setting needs to be inviting to the people that come in here. Is it warm, welcoming? The hospitality has a lot to do with attracting new people to the setting. Now, that doesn't mean you want to tickle their ears and make them feel good with the band or the music and the that kind of stuff. I mean, you still got to preach the Word of God to people, but yet you want to make them feel like when they walk into a setting, it's warm, it's inviting, it's personable, it's hospitality-wise, it's excuse me, it's hospitality, and everything kind of flows together with being that warm, inviting space. It's the people, it's the preaching, it's the setting, and it's the where people are attracted to that. So that's the color. Oh, the sheetrock color. Well, that's my thinking at the moment right now is more in the neutral tones, the beiges, the sand tones, the light browns, for that color scheme is what I'm thinking. In other words, I'd like to take off all the back vertical panels and the horizontal back here, as well as the ceiling. Eliminate all that, put up sheetrock, and then paint it accordingly. Now, this church doesn't lend itself to be a real more traditional painting type setting, the real traditional type paint jobs. You know, we could certainly get into doing some stenciling, doing some borders, doing some fancy murals and all that kind of stuff up here. We've done it with different churches, but this church doesn't warrant that. It's more simplified. So I'd like to get rid of the line, sheetrock the back wall, paint it. My first initial thought, and I will have to say that I have changed my mind in the last couple of churches that I've done. Once I get the first sample of paint up there, it's like, that doesn't work. My first thought was to pull a color out of the brick for this setting here. Maybe not the darkest brick, not the lightest brick, but somewhere in between, and then paint the back wall that color. So that's the color scheme that I am working with, or would be thinking about working with, is using that brick wall as our color palette, and then working off of that. Now, Father has, in the renderings, if you've seen the renderings that we did out there, we toyed with and probably still toying with the idea of the blue ceiling with the stars up there in the main field, in the main nave here. Got a few issues with that as far as how do I carry that down the side walls, out the two wings, and try to make it all kind of one setting. I think we can get by with it as far as in the right tones of blues and the right shades as we go lighter and lighter with those tones of blues out to the side wings. Because, I mean, if I start putting darker colors on the ceilings, especially in the two side wings here, it's going to be like going into a cave. You're just going to kind of feel like that is just coming down on you. And I don't want that. It's low enough the way it is, so I want to actually make it open and feel more airy and open. That's why I don't want light fixtures hanging down off of that ceiling as well, very far if I can help it. So it's a question of, if we do the dark blue up here, what do I do in the two sides? And I think we can accomplish that with a few shades lighter blue. To be honest, I'm not 100% sold on the blue yet, but we've done it. I finished a chapel in Woodbury, Minnesota about a year ago. Gorgeous little chapel. Absolutely gorgeous. We painted the whole ceiling blue, real dark midnight blue, and we put up a bunch of gold stars. It works well. For me, it works very well in a smaller chapel. The chapel was maybe 1/10 the size of this room. I mean, it really does look nice, but I'm just not sure about this massive quantity of blue with the stars. I think it would work well, but I'm just not 100% sold on it yet, for me personally. Because one of the reasons why are these big beams throughout this roof structure. It's the breaking up of that star ceiling that is giving me more of a heartburn than anything else. If it was just a flat ceiling, I'd be more acceptable to it. But these big beams up here are causing me some issues for sure. Because we got lighting issues in here just as well as out there. Your spotlights are up, there are hot spots, there's dark spots. The lighting scheme in the church definitely needs to be addressed so that out here everything is kind of an even flow of light. And just we got to again work with this electrical engineer to figure out how to accomplish that. Yes.
I was here originally when this church was built.
Yeah.
All of that vertical was the same color as the big beams.
Okay.
It all melted together, brought the ceiling down, and was a very warm feeling, even with all of this height. I personally don't like the idea of putting sheetrock over this wood. I don't know if this wood can be brought back. That's all wood that was the same as the pillars.
Yeah, painting.
Rather than painting, sheetrocking and painting again.
Correct. Yeah, well, it's not out of the question that we do that.
It is a personal observation. I'm not saying you should do it.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is a possibility for lowering, for bringing it in, for having the colors all work together, because it certainly did when it was first built.
Yeah, and that's what I said when I first started this. One of the ways to get rid of these lines is paint the walls a darker color, because those lines will blend a lot better with a darker color than they do with this lighter color. So it can be accomplished with just paint, and assuming that's what they had the first time around, it was just a dark paint, Or just dark wood? Just stained wood. Okay. All right. Well, we can certainly strip it back down and do that and get it back to that original color, or we can just paint it to match the wood. To the front wall, right. And that's where you want your focal point to be. But you don't want your focal point to be on the wall still. You want it to be on the altar and the pulpit. But it helps draw you, being that you're coming in from the left, right, whatever. It helps draw you up to this point then, for sure. And gets you into that setting, for sure. Now, one of the churches that I'm working with back in St. Paul has that. Their rear dust wall is, I should have brought a picture of this one. The wood vertical lines, it's got ribs on it. They're about 2.5 inches in depth, so there's a rib that comes out, a 1-inch space, rib in the back, a rib that's out, back and forth, back and forth. It is a little bit more than 3 of these sections wide, give or take, and it's about 18 feet tall. And when you walk into that church, what smacks you in the face is a black wall. You can hardly find the altar. And we're taking that one, and instead of getting rid of the ribs and the lines, because they want that, we're going to lighten them up and keep them, and you still have that visual effect of those ribs, but yet not so overpowering that you lose the altar and the pulpit in that setting. So if that is a direction that the church would like to go, I'm open for that on the front wall, is to, because that's one of my thoughts, was just to paint it a different color, leaving the lines alone, because the darker the color, the more you're going to hide these seam lines. And if you want to just strip that down to the bare wood again, that certainly would be an option. It certainly would work.
It's just by 1%.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sorry, you go. Okay, the question is the carpet flooring would extend out into the narthex. Yes, it does. It includes from the hallway of going into the school, I believe, around the baptismal fount, down into the cry room, back into the sacristies, into the hallways, into the sanctuary, and into the nave. So it's the budget number that I gave included the gathering space area, the nave church area, and all the back rooms. So, but yes, so it would be the same flooring. Yes and no to that one. If we go with a tile, if we go with a tile floor, the question was slip hazard on the terrazzo floor and or tile floor. Would it be a slip hazard with the slope here? The tiles that I would go with, again, eliminating the shiny porcelain, the tile that I would be going with in this setting would be more of a natural stone type tile, where it's a little bit rougher, it's got a little bit of a texture to it, so it wouldn't be this shiny, slippery floor. And then as well, when we seal that tile, there's non-slip sealants that can be applied to the tiles, laid over as a sealant, and that helps as well. What's that? What type of stone? Is that what? No, I'm thinking if I went with a stone in here, it would be more of a natural stone tile. Browns to brown grays, in that family, in those families. I guess that depends on a little bit more of the budget. I can do a simulated stone, cheaper than a natural stone. So if you want to go with the natural stone, and as far as the budget goes, we can do the natural stone. But they make some amazing simulated stuff now that looks like the stone that nobody would know the difference, honestly. And it would be more cost effective. But then again, we'll seal it up with the sealant so it doesn't slip. But to be honest with you, I don't believe that no matter the stone or the terrazzo put in here, I don't feel it would be much of a slip hazard with this setting, either way. You know, we could change and do the terrazzo in here and then do something a little bit, you know, if everybody wanted to still do carpet out into the font area where people are coming in, their shoes will dry off before they get to this point. You know, we could go that route, but I don't have a concern with the slip factor with the terrazzo or the stone in here. None. So anyway, any questions? What? All right, go ahead.
The kneelers, would the kneelers remain, or would they be removed when you're reworking the pews?
The kneelers will be taken off, and my quick inspection around here is they could probably be replaced with new kneelers. So we'll throw these away and just replace them with, for the most part, exactly the same kneeler. The kneelers that you have here are Atwood Hamlin kneelers, some of the best kneelers in the country.
Do we need kneelers?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. In my diocese back in Minnesota, absolutely.
Because the Abbey doesn't have any kneelers.
Well, they built at a time before the newer mandates.
Okay, so this is grandfathered in. Because we have kneelers, they have to continue?
Yes, you have to, because we have to kneel at parts of the liturgy.
Yeah. We've
Diocesan guidelines, national guidelines, not adoption.
Yeah. We've built, over the last probably 20 years, I've built pews all over the Midwest with no kneelers. And in the last 10 or 15 years, we had to go back and put kneelers in every church because it was mandated to have them back. So, yes.
Ken, I know that we have to have the kneelers, but is there any way to like dampen them so that at the end of the consecration we don't get clunking from every side of the church as people come? That drives me crazy. Yeah. Knock it off.
Well, yes and yes to that one. The reason you're getting a lot of clunking, these are extremely lightweight kneelers, and they're very quiet when they're tightened up. Right now, you've got a lot of loose brackets, a lot of loose arms, and you're getting a lot of reverberation and vibration off of that kneeler just being loose.
My concern was that if we go with a tile floor with these kneelers, is it going to exacerbate that problem?
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Once they're tightened up and the rubber feet are back on, everything is working, functionally working well, is it going to eliminate it? No. You're still going to have some of that, but it's not going to be as bad as these loose kneelers are. But now that I've answered it that way, they do make a bracket for these kneelers. To be honest with you, I've been installing Atwood Hamlin's kneelers for 40 years, and I have yet to use them. They are extremely expensive, but they're spring-loaded, where the kneeler will come down and it'll go back up. Nice and quiet, nice and easy. But you're probably adding $5,000 to $10,000 to the kneelers. They're expensive. And again, out of all my years of being a representative for Hamlin, I have yet to use them. Nobody wants to put the money into them. Yeah.
Can I make one more observation about the ceiling? When I first saw the renderings about the blue ceiling and the stars, I was really excited about that. But the more I thought about it, sorry, Father, I don't know how, as you said, how well that's going to work on the ceiling, given the interruption with the beams. To me, it's almost like back in the 70s and 80s when people were putting Rolls-Royce grills on Toyotas. Well, I mean, what did you have? You didn't have a Rolls-Royce, you had a Toyota with a grill, with a Rolls-Royce grill on it. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, when I come into a church, I mean, obviously, I've got my opinion. After 45 years of doing this, I have my opinions. I have some goals and some, and that kind of sounds bad, but it's the ultimate. My goal is the ultimate, to make a setting here that's inviting, that focuses on the liturgy, that everybody can enjoy. So that's my ultimate goal. When Father started with the blue ceiling, he knows I wasn't a fan of it, and 100% of it initially.
Well, can I just interrupt? I just want to make it clear. I didn't think we had to do it either. I said, put out all the options.
It was an option.
You know, it's like the stained glass windows.
Yep.
I don't like the stars. So, I mean, so just please, it's nothing I was trying to impose.
We're just going to keep blaming Father. But no, this setting is just too broke up for me, for that type of a ceiling. It's just too big and it's too broken up. I mean, I like it in smaller chapels, like I said. We did a St. Ambrose. It's beautiful, but and I'm not a fan up here yet. Yeah.
A two-part sort of question. How do we know that if we put the tile in and change the tile all around the altar, we're not going to have even more, almost a negative echo effect? And one thing I want to point out too, we have a lot of issues at times with kids crying, and it's extremely distracting as it is now. Now, if we have tile and we go for maximum acoustics, how is that going to impact liturgy? And second, what is your opinion of our cry room? Is there anything we can do to encourage or make that better so people might want to use it more? Or have you not thought about that?
Yes and no. Okay, the cry room. Nobody wants to use the cry room because it's too far removed to the left. Okay, they just can't be part of the liturgy. It's uninviting. Without spending a lot of money revamping the setting, I don't know where to go with it, to be honest with you. You know, you've got some storage sacristies, or, you know, to be honest with you, I've never been through those doors, so I'm not sure what's behind those. Confessionals. That's why I haven't been behind them. Okay. Now, that could be a setting place for them. So if we swap the cry room with the confessionals, revamp that section over here, take away the shrine area with all the votive lights, bring that in a little bit, redesign this corner over here. I'm sure we could figure out a way to get the confessionals over in this area and get the cry room over in this area. But now you're starting to talk to some structural things and some money. Now, I don't know how much that's going to add, you know, but without looking at the confessionals in that space, and I would say it's probably doable. It's just a question of how much vamping we have to do. Can we take a little bit of space from the church? Can we take a little bit over here and remove some walls and adjust some walls and that kind of stuff? Is it doable? I would say probably yes. And I'm sorry. Oh, the noise. Well, I was just going to say that it's more likely your sound system than the carpet. It's the carpet and the acoustical experts of this industry, the churches, they will argue from one end to the other, back and forth. One says that no hard floors. It has to be carpet so it doesn't reverberate and rebounce and all kinds of stuff. The next person says, well, if you have 1,000 people sitting out here, what does a carpet have to do with anything? Now, if you've got 2 people out here, like tonight, it's a little bit echoey in here, it could affect it. What affects it more than just the carpet, sound waves go kind of up and out. They don't go down, generally. They go up and out. And what happens is they hit everything out in space, and it bounces or is absorbed, one of the two. So if it goes out here and hits this wall back here, it's going to bounce back out someplace and go somewhere. And I'm not a sound guy expert. Just over 45 years, I've picked up a few things. So it's going to bounce, it's going to come back out, and it's just going to keep bouncing around. If it goes up in there, what's going to happen is it's just going to hit these beams, and it's just going to go back and forth. It's going to stop up there. So it's more or less, it's not the setting materials as it is the sound system as a whole. Are the speakers in the right locations to get underneath all these slope ceilings? Or the big ceiling out here, is it hitting that back wall and kind of coming back out and going left and right, or is it just going right back up the slope? So it's I can't answer that 100% positively that the tile floor is going to help or hinder the acoustical value in here, but I do know that maybe changing some speakers around in different locations, I'm sure it would help immensely. And I'm thinking that the tile floor or the concrete floor or the terrazzo floor would probably help it in here more than hinder it. But again, I'm not an expert, so we could bring in an acoustical expert and try it out and see what he says, and based on the slope walls and the beams and the corners and that kind of stuff, and can figure it out. But I would say it's probably going to help. Smaller? Yeah. That is actually, to be honest with you, that's one of them I've never brought up with Father or the committees that I met with prior, because yeah. I'm sorry? How do we make the altar sanctuary smaller, if we can? Well, my first thought is when I go back into a church, I want to accomplish certain goals without breaking the bank. Okay? So there's a few things that I just kind of give up on in my first impressions and thinkings, and that one of those would be to change the whole sanctuary setting. You know, when you're talking $2 or $3 million on a project of this nature, and then you start changing the cry room, the confessionals, the sanctuary floor, the elevations up and down, and it's like, okay, now you could quickly add another $1 million or $2 million. And if it's desirable and the budget works, then let's go for some concepts on changing the settings. But again, my thinking is, how do we accomplish the most with the least amount of money, and still make things kind of functionally work and the setting enjoyable and pleasing to everybody? So I never really did bring this one up as far as revamping the setting. If you took that cry room out and put the confessionals over there, and that would certainly take out a section over there, to doing that. Yeah, you could just chop, well, let's just say we walk over to this beam right here and we just chop everything off from here that way. Just remove it, bring it back down to the sanctuary setting, and do something with that setting as far as maybe we move the choir over to that side of the church. bring everything up. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a setting, a situation over there has to be refigured to get into the sacristies, into that, yeah, just the sacristies over there, to get over there to flow, to make it flows, so nobody, it's no trippings, that kind of stuff. I haven't spent more than about 10 minutes thinking about this up here, to be honest with you, as far as changing the whole setting, because I just didn't go there. These are my ultimate dreams for the church. That would be my ultimate dream, is to get rid of these beams and restart with a fresh floor up here, different size and shape. I certainly would like to get rid of this stuff over here. So maybe getting rid of this, moving it back over here, revamping the entrance to the sacristy somehow. Again, I haven't spent any time analyzing any of this, so I don't even know if it's doable. But there's things we could do, certainly. It really goes back to the function of the setting, the function of the service, and the amount of money that wants to be spent. So you got, yeah. I have walked in this church. The question was which door I came in. And every time I've come to this church, I've come in a different door, so that I get the feel of that door, the center doors, and that door. So I have done all three. My personal preference, if I would come to this church, I'd come in that door all the time, because that's my best shot for me to see the setting, and then this middle door over here is pretty much a straight shot to the setting as well as this stuff over here. Okay. You're right. The window, I've been here in the daytime. The window is absolutely gorgeous when the light comes through it. But to me, or for me, in the designing of a church setting, the sanctuary up front, and the theology of the churches that we work with, I want that window to be an afterthought. I don't want it to be the focal point. It's a beautiful window, but the focal point still is the Word of Christ and the body and blood of Christ. So that's where I want your attention to be drawn to immediately. And then as you sit down and relax, it's like, oh, there is a window up there, and it is beautiful. So that's where I want to have that stuff complement the setting, not take over the focal point of the setting. So that is what I try to accomplish with that. I mean, the window is beautiful. I agree with you. That's why I'd like to put the 12 in the back here to enhance that. Again, the setting up here is, for me, first and foremost, the body and blood in Scripture. And then everything else is kind of an afterthought to it. So I think I answered your question. All right. Yes.
The choir used to originally be in this section right here, so they were not part of the altar was smaller, and the seats went all the way up to about where the piano was. I have old pictures I can show you if you're interested. My question is, you mentioned the choir sort of being here and taking away the focal. What do you think about the screen? A lot of modern churches have screens. It's probably a pretty controversial subject. How do you think that takes away or adds to our?
Well, now you're getting into my personal opinions. My personal opinion is I don't like them. I would just as soon them go away and not be part of the service. If you're going to live stream the service, don't do it up here in front. Do it in the back someplace and send it to people at home. I would get rid of those. My opinion. Again, it's one of those. For me, it's not. Again, the Scripture, the liturgy, is the focal point, and I don't want to see a bunch of distractions. That we just finished a church 2 weeks ago. Exactly what you guys are doing. We revamped the pews. We took the floor and refinished the concrete on the floor, stripped off the carpet, refinished the concrete on the floor, and they went with the concrete. They were thinking about doing terrazzo, but once we got the carpet off, they really liked the concrete look. So we just rebuffed and sealed the concrete. It worked great. New lighting, new painting, and everything, for the most part, exactly what you guys are doing here. The church was probably maybe a third this size, a little bit smaller. Once we got into the church and started, they had the state flag, they had the American flag, they had the veterans flag, they had a couple of other flags up front, they had palm trees and pine trees and everything else. Not one of those things came back because it's not the proper setting for that. Again, my teaching, my beliefs, the theology. You want all that setting, you want to create a memorial room somewhere where you have the artifacts and you have different things. It's not up here. So all that went away, and they said that it was going to be a fight at the end of the renovation for people wanting to bring it back in. We finished the renovation, and nobody said boo. It's gone. It's just gone. And it looks phenomenal, the place. They had so much stuff cluttered up in the front that, well, like that one picture, you couldn't find the altar. It was just gone. Yeah.
When will we find out how much money we're talking about?
The preliminary budget that I gave right now is over $2 million. And that is going to be reasonably close to doing the kind of a tile floor, the pews, the painting, sheetrocking, that kind of stuff. Once we get an absolute direction as to what we want to do here, or what you folks want to do, well, that was the other question about, everybody has an opinion about that. Once we have a direction of where we're headed, then we do the final budget numbers. So, in other words, one of the things when we first started talking wasn't doing any revamping of the lighting, and that was like a year and a half or 2 years ago, whenever we started. But it got to the point, the more we looked at it, the more was here and visited and that kind of stuff, the lighting had to be part of this package. So depending on what the electrical engineer comes up with as far as what we can do with the lighting, I don't know where this budget's going to go. I would say it's going to be between 2 and 3 million somewhere. Do you want to do terrazzo floor versus tile? Do you want to throw these pews away and rebuild brand new pews? Do you want to use these pews? In other words, if you throw these away, the only reason to throw these away would be to change the design of the pews. If you don't want to change the design, these are good pews. We just have to clean them up, repair them, and refinish them. So once kind of the approval of the congregation, the committees, the building committee, the building people, once that is, okay, let's do this, and this is the direction we want to go, then the final budget numbers will be placed on that. One of the things, again, the budget numbers for me is, I always try to do the best I can for the church, financially and or product-wise. I want a great product, and I want a fair number for everybody. So my guys, I'm from St. Paul, all right? I've got painters, I've got the woodworkers, I've got flooring people, I've got electricians, I've got the engineers, I've got everybody that I could bring down here to do this project. But my personal opinion is I would rather hire the electrical people down here. I'd rather hire the flooring people down here. I'd rather, if we're going to sheetrock and do the demo and do that, I'd rather hire those people from down here. That's going to save the church a bunch of money. If we can find quality people in the area, which near Chicago I would say we can, find the quality people to do this work, and I just oversee it, then that's the direction I want to go. We'll take the pews back for us at the shop. I'll probably have my painters come down here, because I know the painters in the general area are twice as expensive as I am, because they come into my territory in St. Paul and they take jobs away from me at double the price. And I'm thinking, like, I'm doing something wrong here. But anyway, so I'd like to use a lot of the general contractors in the area to help save the per diems and the expenses of travel and that kind of stuff to come here to work, again, to save some money. So the budget would be resolved at the point where we finalize the designs, finalize the contractors that we want to use, and then we'll finalize the budget at that point. Yeah.
And based on the plan as it exists right now, how long do you think that this whole thing will take?
Well, that depends on what we do. If we're going to revamp confessionals and cry rooms and that kind of stuff, but to come in and do what we're talking about doing, in other words, let's say we leave the sanctuary alone. We just do the flooring, we do the pews, and we do painting, whether we sheetrock it or not sheetrock it or strip it down to the bare wood again, that kind of stuff. You're looking at, the electrical might be, you're probably looking at 6 months to start to finish the project. Again, depending on in-depth how we have to do this. If we're going to put the terrazzo floor down versus the tile floor, that has to be done in phases and buffing, and tile's a lot quicker. And if we're going to do any revamping as far as building and or choir area, moving that, or the sanctuary, you could be 6-8 months pretty easily. Yeah. So you had a question? Yeah. What you need is nothing, really, to be honest. You don't need anything. But we can go back to that comment I made with the architect. A stale, stagnant church is dead, as far as inviting and warming and that kind of stuff. Again, the one thing that you're going to need sooner than later is fixing your pews. That's going to be a need that's going to come up real soon. Do you need to paint the ceiling and change the sheetrock and strip this down to the wood if you want to do that? Or put new flooring in here? No, you don't need it. You can survive the way it is. So the answer is you really don't need anything. But again, that stale church is dead thing. But yeah, I'm sorry.
You're talking about putting that tile down and have to put a coating on top of that, make it non-slip. Is that a one-time thing, or you have to recoat that every couple of years?
It's all based on usage. I would say you're probably going to have to reseal it again on usage 5-10 years, maybe. So seal it up, yeah. It's not going to be a one-time thing for sure, no. But again, it's all on usage. One thing nice about the tile versus the carpet or a hard surface is cleanability. It's so much easier to clean a hardwood floor than it is to try to vacuum around all these pews. I've done it for years, and it's hard. It's a lot easier just mopping it, running around. But so it's going to be a maintenance thing, yeah.
Kind of directly talking about the sound in here, changing the sound system with respect to carpet. Is there a plan to upgrade the sound system? Part two of that is, well, I don't know if you know, but in Narthex, you can't really hear very much at all of what's going on in the liturgy. And if people take a child out to the Narthex, I think that would actually help part of the problems. No one can hear everything. That I think should be addressed. Father, is that part of the plan at all, you know?
Tonight, actually, with the speakers, with Father and me, is the first time I've heard the sound system on, and I would say, put it on the hit list. I would, yeah. Yeah, I just the reverberation and at least getting it back from where I'm standing and what's coming back to me, it could use some help for sure. But yeah. In the back? No. Yeah, no. If the general comment is these pews are in a configuration where it doesn't work, when we take these out and refinish them, we can cut them, shorten them up, revamp, move, twist, and reconfigure. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I thought somebody else had a question over here, but maybe no. All right. Now, again, these are, when I am hired to come into a church to help the church in the designing of the new setting, these are it's like one of the slides. Everybody has an opinion. These are my opinions to help the setting as a whole function, warm, inviting, to accomplish that as best I can. Do you have to do anything? No, not really. The church functions, it works. Is it the best it can be? My opinion is no, it's not. I think you can do a few things that would make this setting for not a lot of money. Yeah, well, the last committee I met, a guy went, he said, well, maybe 10,000 is not a lot of money to you, but it is to me. And it's like, it's a lot of money to everybody. And of course, I understand. Churches always have budgets, constraints, and they're trying to do the due diligence and spend their money wisely with the discernment of what Christ, God, would like us to do in His building. And it's tough. It's a tough decision. It's a tough choice to do. especially when you start talking a couple $1 million. I mean, I understand. I do. But I would certainly, again, whether it be now or a year from now or 2 years from now, I know your centennial is coming up. 3 years? Yep. Yeah. So I know your centennial's coming up, and this would be just an amazing time to do something in here for that event, for sure. So, if nobody has any more questions, yes. I'm this is where I always get, like, I'm going to apologize up front for any choir members or the choir director. This is not an exhibitionist. You know, they are to be, in my opinion, to be heard, not seen. Okay? I'd stick them back in a corner somewhere. Again, that's my opinion. They're not entertainers, okay? They're here to worship God, and they're here to lead you guys in worship of God. So I would move them, let's put them in a cry room. I'm sorry, that was I would like to move them out of up front, certainly. You know, maybe back over here or back over there. You know, we really haven't talked about doing that, so I haven't spent a lot of time analyzing that. But anyway, yeah.
The one thing I wanted to say about the choir is that when this church was renovated in 2000, 2001, one of the things that Father Tybee had said was that he wanted to move the choir from back there up here because liturgically they were supposed to be up front because they were part of the liturgy. And he even had that space, as you can see, he had it dug out to accommodate. So now it's like, are they or aren't they supposed to be up near the sanctuary?
Well, they're leaders of the worship. They're leaders of you folks worshiping Christ, for sure. But again, this is where, again, I get into it with the choir director a lot. They're not entertainers, they're not exhibitionists. They're supposed to be leaders and worshiping and leading you folks. So can they do that up here in a kind of indiscreet way? Then, yeah, okay. But I just have a hard time with it. And I've never, back up here, I'm not an expert, okay? I don't know everything. After 45 years of doing this, 48 years of doing this, you know, I still learn too. If that is literally part of the liturgy, having a choir up front, then I need to change my thinking over the next 20 years in business.
Yeah, the only reason I bring it up is because there's a lot of churches in the area that have done the same thing, that have moved the choir very close to the sanctuary. So I don't know if there is a requirement for that, or if it's just a matter of personal taste.
Yeah, I promise you this, I am going to dig into it and find out. Because move them back up. And the other thing is, I don't want to be called a liar in any way, shape, or form of telling people that, put them back in a corner. And I don't mean literally the corner, but I have a hard time with them being the exhibitionists up front. Leaders of worship, absolutely, that's what they're supposed to do. I just have an opinion about where they should lead. And if I am wrong with that, I'll have to dig into that one and find out, because that's the first time I've heard that it's part of the liturgy being up front. And that's, again, my teachers, the gentleman that and Carol, the one lady, I forgot Sister Mary too, but those people that I've worked with over the last 45 years, they all have that same theory, thinking. Especially a couple of them are really strong opinion about it, that they belong in the back. They belong in the choir loft. They belong anywhere but up front. And if my mentors are misleading me, then I'll have to do some research and figure that out as well. So, okay. Yes, sir. No, I'd go from the brickwork up. Yeah. The brickwork I like. And the more I'm thinking about initial layout here, that might not be so bad either, depending on the color, and not sheetrock it. As long as I can hide the lines and the spots, that's the key for me in here. So, yes, ma'am. Yeah, and that's what Father said about one of the slides that we started, is there are opinions. Everybody has one. And it's not to say they're right, wrong, or anywhere in between. What I'm hired to do, what I'm asked to do, is come into a church and get the function of the church building, the function of the liturgy, the services, the flow of everything to kind of work and go together. And not saying it doesn't, but the focal points, the visuals, the lighting, I take all that into consideration. And I just don't come to a service and watch the lay people or the priest or anybody walking around. I have to look at everything when I come in here. And not being a part of the services sometimes is a detriment for me, because I'm not part of this service. I don't know the function of it. I pretty much do, but you guys might have a certain way to do things. So that's a little bit of a downside for me when I come into doing this, because I'm talking to you folks about spending a bunch of money, changing a setting that 50%, 60%, 10% of you think is just fine, and I know that. It's an endless battle. When I meet with the committees, they're on both ends of the extreme and in the middle. Some do, some don't. Some is absolutely no way. Some leave the church because you do it. Some, you acquire or attract new people because you did it. It's unfortunate, but that is, for the most part, the way a renovation of a church goes. There's going to be some folks that are not going to be happy. They were happy the way it is right now, and they don't want to touch it. I understand that, but I also understand that when we've renovated a lot of churches, or has proven to be, when we've renovated a lot of churches, some of my harshest critics in the committees are the most grateful and thankful that we actually did the work. Because once they saw it done, they were knowing that they were, and their opinions weren't quite thinking right when we first started talking about doing the work. So it's a balance for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Father. And I'm sorry? I have not. Yes, I mean, I have gone to several of the churches that I've renovated back in St. Paul and Minnesota area because I'm close to it. But to drive 6 hours to come down for Mass, I would say if the congregation votes to proceed with this, I probably would, to come down and visit a few Masses just to see. But the videos? Yeah. Are you live streaming them? Not anymore. But you got recorded video. Yeah, generally, that's, yeah, it's probably just going to be a shot of up front. Yeah, I mean, the expense for me to come down here and do some of this, just to put it bluntly, I guess I'd like to be moving forward with the project before I spend a bunch of money. No, I drove in a couple hours ago, so. But anyway, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Very great presentation. Thank you all for your questions and observations. I took copious notes because I take your comments seriously. Very soon, I'll convene our Art and Environment Committee, which I hope you all realize we have in place. We're blessed to have on it two engineers, Jack Hayes and Scott Butler, or Jimmy Butler, Scott's his dad. Jack is studying for the diaconate. You may know, you see him at the 9:30 Mass. He couldn't be here tonight because Monday is their class time and they're required to be there. But Jack has been working consistently with an electrical engineer who's been in here a number of times and came up with one plan that included all these chandeliers. I said, I don't think they'll want to go with that. So he's gone back to the drawing board, but a lot has been going on in terms of that. And we certainly were thinking also of an acoustical engineer when it gets closer to that time. So we did also hire CCS, Community Counseling Service, which is the service we used for the capital campaign the last time and previously. They've done great work for us. And we hired them for what they call the feasibility study. That's the first phase. And you'll be hearing more about that soon. What that's designed to do is to survey the parishioners to see if there's an interest in the project, and from that, what amount of money can we conceivably spend on it. So that's in the right place as far as the timeline goes, in their opinion. And when we know more about that, then we can revisit some of these issues and talk further about what these enhancements or repairs or renovations could be. I was intrigued with the choir discussion. Historically, choirs have been in different places in churches. You know, in the Middle Ages, they were in chancels. After the monastic, If you go into some of the Anglican churches, you still see them there. So, and they've been in lofts. I think what Father Tybee was doing was following the directives that the choir should not be remote, but be certainly a part of the worshiping assembly. I agree, not performers, and maybe that isn't the best place for it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be up front. But I think that's what he's trying to do, is bring it into one harmonious community experience. But if it doesn't work, we can certainly change that. I'm reminded of the wisdom of Abbot Dismas, those of you who know him, several abbots ago. Little change, little opposition. Big change, big opposition. Always opposition. So it's a good rule of thumb. Whenever there's change, there's going to be opposition. And I think we just have to be aware of that and willing to accept that, and that'll be all right. Okay? Thank you all. I'll close with a prayer. If you would join me in standing. And this is another preface from the dedication of churches that I used last week. Oh, I also want to say, last week's presentation is now online, right? Thank you, Alex, for editing it, putting it together, and it's on Facebook. Where is it? On the webpage. So you can watch it if you so desire. And again, thank you, Ken, for coming. We loved having you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, Holy Father, Almighty, Eternal God, it is truly right and just, our duty in salvation, always and everywhere to give you thanks. For in this visible house that you have let us build, and where you never cease to show favor to the family on pilgrimage to you in this place, you wonderfully manifest and accomplish the mystery of your communion with us. Here, you build up for yourself the temple that we are, and cause your church, spread throughout the world, to grow ever more and more as the Lord's own body, till she reaches her fullness in the vision of peace in the heavenly city of Jerusalem. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Good night. Travel safely.